Well, nearly 4 years ago, a student revolution surfaced, and students have been involved in running battles with security guards ever since. We've seen students beaten, brutalized, and most recently at the Durban University of Technology, killed by private security guards. Universities argue that the use of private security is necessary to protect everyone's rights. During a protest, now, CIRA report, now that is the industry which regulates private security companies, contained shocking revelations of illegal actions against students by these private security firms hired by universities. The report found that guards are not trained in crowd control and acted inappropriately. So who should be held accountable? Protesting students or the universities? My guests tonight are University South Africa CEO Ahmed Bauer and Fees Must Fall activist Busisiwe Siabe. Good to have both of you. Busisiwe.
Yes.
What was your response to those findings, and in light of your own experience?
I mean, for me, those findings were not a testament to anything new. We had known, as students who engaged in Fees Must Fall, that how private security was acting on our campuses was illegal. What we wanted the report to tell us, rather, was what will be done now that we have determined the fact that, private security has acted illegally. Will private security be removed from our universities and various campuses across the country? And what essentially is the university going to do about this matter? Because of the fact that a lot of students have suffered at the hands of private security that was supposedly there to protect the institution.
Remind us how private security works amongst students, what you've seen them do, and what you think is acceptable and not.
So it is definitely not acceptable for private security to harass students, to sexually assault students as well, because many cases came out around sexual assault in various institutions. It is unacceptable for them to be throwing stun grenades, for them to be shooting students with rubber bullets, for them to be disrupting lessons, for them to be disrupting, meal times. I mean, private security, to a large extent, were the reason why the protest movement ended up being violent. They were the ones being violent unto students. Students were being dragged across campuses. Students were being beaten up by private security. Even recently at the University of Johannesburg, a student was beaten up for basically wanting to enter his graduation venue. So it just shows you the animalistic nature and the incompetence of private security on our campuses, and it's honestly unacceptable.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about student violence as well, because there have been cases too. What is your response to this report, and how can you justify using these private security forces?
Look, first of all, I think the report is kind of even-handed. It kind of really does point to really serious problems, and it came to a point, in fact, with the death of this young student at DUT. But at the same time, I think that what it does is problematize the issue. And one of the really big issues is that the police are always late. Public order policing, which is meant to be doing the proper control of demonstrations and so on, generally appear 3 or 4 hours after time.
But they say they have problems gaining access.
Well, we would not agree with that.
And even talking to management.
The regular response from them, and I was Vice Chancellor at DUT years ago, and the standard response was that we just spread too thin. We've got demonstrations going on here, there, everywhere, and we just don't have the capacity to deploy people now. The result of that, of course, is that universities have to depend on internal security and private security, because there's no other option, if you like. But what the report does show is this very clear indication that it's really the police that should be responsible.
Okay, so we agree. The police should be responsible. That should be the first port of call. It's not happening.
It's not happening.
These people who have taken security now are not doing a good job. They are abusing it badly in many circumstances. So how do you vet them? How do you decide who's going to be on these campuses?
Well, the problem, of course, is that demonstrations are always very complex situations, right? So you never know really what's going to play out kind of in the event of a demonstration. And so, these undertrained guards who should really be kind of protecting everybody, really are thrown into the deep end and kind of respond in ways which are horrendous. Now, I'm not speaking about the rape and kind of the violence against women and so on. That's a different matter, and those are criminal issues.
Okay, so you have security forces, sometimes armed. They're not trained. What are they doing there?
One, according to a lot of what your colleagues will say, particularly Adam Habib, they'll tell you that they're there to make sure that they protect the infrastructure of the university. If they're there to protect the infrastructure of the university, why are they coming into contact with students? When students, during a mass demonstration, and according to the regulations Gathering Act, students are allowed to gather as a significant number and to demonstrate. Why are they interacting with those crowds where they don't have crowd control, training, they don't have the skills to manage crowds? Why are they even engaging with students?
And how should they behave? Obviously, I should imagine there's a fear factor if you're not properly trained and you're seeing hordes, coming down on you. There are students who are troublemakers. We've seen that time and time again. How should they deal with that?
In that instance,
because it does take two.
In that instance, they should allow the policing units, the public policing order units to be able to step in. If not, the police need to be able to step in, because that is the responsibility of the SAPS and the policing unit.
But they're not getting there.
The only reason why they're not getting access to our institutions is, yet again, back to the university. The university does not allow them to get access into our institutions. Apart from that, we have our own security on campus, which many campuses like to call campus control. A lot of our campus control officials know a lot of the students who supposedly might be troublemakers. They are able to identify and to mitigate situations. They do have that kind of training, but campus control is not utilized in that situation. But rather, what the universities will use is private security, and most of the time that private security are ex-military officials who have gone to war across the continent of Africa and don't know how to handle crowds. They are there essentially to eliminate a problem, and when you're faced with mass demonstrations like students, they only see threat and they only see violence, and that's how they act, and that is unacceptable.
I just disagree.
I could see that. Go ahead.
No, I think that the first port of call is always the police. I mean, why would universities spend millions of rand every year?
But we've been told now that
why would they spend millions of rand?
Access.
Which is ridiculous. I mean, the first port of call is always the police. Why would universities spend millions of rand every year?
So they're just saying this to cover themselves, to make an excuse, the police?
No, I think the police simply do not pitch up. That's the bottom line.
Why?
Because they stretch too thin, they think it's not as important as it should be, whatever the case might be. And I think you're right. I mean, the big challenge for us is to understand, where do we go with this? Just how do we kind of
So what do
take
you
this
suggest?
Well, we're working very closely.
And as you said, they cost you a lot of money too.
Of course, yes, of course. We're working very closely with CIRA now to try and understand exactly what the role of private security is, because police are not going to be available, exactly what the role of the police are. What is it that prevents the police from coming onto campus? What kinds of training programs do we need for the private security, if they're going to play that role? And in particular, just kind of trying to understand how to kind of rebuild relationships, if you like, between the student population, the staff population, internal security, private security, and so on. So those are things that we are working on now. This report, by the way, is...
So clearly you're going to keep these security firms there?
There's no possibility of not having the security firms.
Okay, so, I mean, crowd control was one of the biggest issues that was highlighted.
We must just remind ourselves, Jane, that, we have had 800 million rands of damage to our campuses. Now, we might argue that happened... Yeah, we might argue that happened because of the conflict and private security. Again, I would disagree with that. I mean, I think that there's a lot of...
Okay, so there's bad behaviour on all sides. I mean, those sort of militant forces within the students, those who break down the buildings and attack that. I mean, that obviously is something that needs to be addressed. What do you see going forward now? I mean, what are you preparing for? What are students planning for the next couple of months?
At this particular point in time, I understand the fact that there is some intricacies between the two, the students and private security as well, but it is unacceptable for, the prioritization of private buildings that are insured over the lives of students. Students are literally dying. People and parents are sending their children to institutions to be killed at the hands of private security that is not skilled. What students need to be able to do now is to be able to take this report and to see what legal action we can take up against the institutions and the various institutions that we...
What sort of advice have you received?
At this particular point in time, we're still consulting with various legal expertise in order to see if there is a case that we can build against institutions of higher learning, because a lot of students who have faced, the brutality of private security are currently in hospital. They can't go back to go finish their studies. Some of them have broken limbs. Others have literally been buried. They have died. So we need to be able to find recourse and to be able to find a way to hold the university accountable. Every action has a reaction, and the university needs to understand that this is going to be something that we're going to take very seriously as the movement.
I hope so. Thank you, both of you. It's obviously an incredibly serious situation. That's our show for tonight. News is next.